But even the bloodiest pirate captains could not outrun history. As Royal Navy patrols tightened across the Atlantic, their ships were hunted down, their crews scattered, and their leaders killed in battle or hanged at execution dock. The ocean slowly swallowed their wrecks, but not their legacy. The Golden Age of Piracy ended in blood, leaving behind shattered ships, forgotten graves, and legends that still haunt the Atlantic to this day.
Enjoy the video, and don't forget to subscribe.
Trace your finger along the map from Nassau across the Caribbean and into the Atlantic, and picture the year 1718 as the smell of rotting oak, boiling pine tar, damp hemp rigging, stale bilge water, and lingering sulfur drifted beneath gray skies while snapping canvas echoed above heavy swells. Few periods in maritime history witnessed more relentless bloodshed than the final years of the Golden Age of Piracy, when ambitious captains transformed ordinary sea lanes into floating graveyards stretching hundreds of miles beyond the horizon. Merchant convoys carrying sugar, tobacco, indigo, silver, and enslaved people crossed waters haunted by swift sloops displacing between 80 and 120 tons, their pronounced tumble-home strengthening broadside resistance, while thick white oak futtocks, fastened with hand-forged iron spikes measuring nearly 11 inches long, absorbed tremendous stresses during violent maneuvers. Pirate vessels sacrificed cargo capacity for speed, often mounting 8 to 16 bronze cannon cast from alloys containing roughly 88% copper and 10% tin, each resting upon compact oak truck carriages secured by breeching ropes exceeding 1 inch in diameter. Every cannon crew carefully measured black powder composed of approximately 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur before ramming felt wads, iron round shot, and oak tampions into polished bores whose repeated firing gradually enlarged the interior by tiny fractions of an inch. When ignition reached the powder through the vent, expanding gases accelerated the projectile with terrifying force, splintering enemy hull planks into razor-sharp wooden fragments that often killed more sailors than the iron ball itself. Before examining the infamous captains whose names inspired terror across entire oceans, it is necessary to understand that every successful pirate attack began long before the first broadside erupted across the sea. Picture the first pale light of dawn revealing what countless merchant sailors feared more than hurricanes, because a low black silhouette emerging beyond the horizon often belonged to a pirate captain who understood that terror itself could become a weapon more valuable than gold. Among the most infamous stood Edward Teach, remembered as Blackbeard, whose flagship Queen Anne's Revenge displaced roughly 300 tons and carried nearly 40 heavy guns after her capture in 1717. Before battle, he twisted slow-burning cannon fuses beneath his broad hat, allowing thick white smoke rich with sulfur compounds to surround his face until witnesses believed they confronted something supernatural rather than a man. Psychological warfare frequently ended resistance before a boarding hook ever struck a rail, preserving both ammunition and valuable cargo. When resistance continued, grappling irons attached to hemp cables thicker than a sailor's wrist crashed across enemy bulwarks, while boarding parties armed with flintlock pistols, boarding axes, cutlasses measuring nearly 30 inches, and heavy belaying pins crossed violently onto crowded decks. Every impact echoed through oak beams joined by mortise and tenon construction, shaking deck knees, hatch combings, and hanging knees supporting the upper works. Splintered planks became clouds of lethal wooden needles driven by musket balls and cannon fragments. Blackbeard deliberately cultivated absolute fear because frightened crews surrendered faster than determined ones, reducing damage to captured vessels that could later be sold, burned, or incorporated into pirate flotillas. Yet even his calculated brutality represented only one chapter in an Atlantic where other captains left entire shipping routes littered with shattered hulls, floating cargo, severed rigging, and the unburied bodies of men carried for weeks by wind, tides, and scavenging sharks before finally disappearing beneath the restless sea. Picture the year 1720 as trade between Jamaica, Barbados, Virginia, and London reached unprecedented volume, creating irresistible opportunities for pirate captains whose articles of agreement promised equal shares while secretly rewarding ruthless efficiency above every other virtue. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, captured or destroyed more than 400 vessels during an astonishing 3-year career, commanding disciplined crews that treated piracy less as reckless adventure than as a military enterprise. His flagship Royal Fortune carried dozens of cannon arranged to maximize overlapping fields of fire, while experienced quartermasters calculated powder expenditure, sail trim, and boarding assignments before contact with an enemy. During pursuit, every halyard, brace, sheet, and clewline required constant adjustment as sailors climbed ratlines into swaying tops more than 70 feet above the sea, balancing upon foot ropes no wider than a man's hand. Careening remained essential between campaigns because marine growth covering the hull dramatically reduced speed, forcing crews to heel the vessel onto one side before scraping away barnacles, shellfish, and weed with iron scrapers, then driving fresh oakum into opened seams and sealing them beneath boiling pine tar. Roberts understood that superior maintenance often decided battles before the first shot was fired, allowing his ships to overtake slower merchantmen burdened by hundreds of tons of cargo. Those who resisted encountered disciplined broadsides timed with remarkable precision, each recoil driving cannon carriages backward until thick breaching ropes snapped them to a violent stop. Iron shot punched through oak planking nearly 4 inches thick, smashing knees, beams, capstans, casks, and human bodies alike, while exploding barrels of pitch and lamp oil transformed confined decks into furnaces where smoke, splinters, blood, and burning canvas merged into scenes remembered by the few survivors as oceans seemingly covered in drifting corpses and shattered wreckage. Picture the waters off West Africa where merchant fleets carrying gold dust, ivory, textiles, and enslaved captives crossed the same winds that pirate lookouts scanned from the masthead with brass spyglasses polished every morning. Here, the distance between fortune and annihilation could shrink to less than a single cable length. Pirate captains exploited prevailing trade winds and coastal currents with remarkable precision, often approaching from the quarter least visible to exhausted helmsmen. Letters of marque once issued during wartime had blurred the boundary between privateering and outright piracy, leaving many seasoned captains fully trained in naval tactics before turning against the very empires they had served. A well-handled 90-ton sloop could tack faster than a heavily laden merchantman exceeding 300 tons, allowing pirates to rake the vulnerable stern where the thin transom offered little protection against solid iron shot. Cannonballs shattered tillers, wheel assemblies, rudder heads, and steering tackles, leaving helpless ships wallowing broadside to the sea while additional volleys smashed chain plates supporting the standing rigging. As masts collapsed, they dragged enormous webs of hemp shrouds, yards, and torn canvas across crowded decks, crushing sailors beneath spars weighing several thousand pounds. Boarding followed immediately, the attackers advancing beneath smoke, carrying the bitter odor of burned sulfur and scorched oak, while flintlock pistols flashed at arm's length. Those refusing to surrender often met swift execution intended not merely to eliminate resistance, but to spread fear throughout the Atlantic trading network. Survivors later described entire stretches of ocean where floating barrels, broken hatch covers, splintered boats, shattered gun carriages, tangled rigging, and lifeless bodies drifted together for days, carried by wind and tide until scavenging fish, sharks, and relentless currents erased nearly every trace of the slaughter except the stories whispered by the few fortunate enough to escape. The campaign against piracy ultimately became a campaign of endurance as much as battle. Royal Navy frigates hunted pirate sloops across thousands of miles, using superior logistics, disciplined gunnery, and coordinated patrols to wear down crews already weakened by disease, shortages, and constant pursuit. One by one, the captains who had covered the Atlantic with blood fell beneath cannon fire, musket volleys, or the hangman's rope, leaving only shattered wrecks and fading legends. When the Golden Age of Piracy ended, the sea slowly reclaimed its dead. Oak hulls settled into darkness, Bronze cannon disappeared beneath coral, hemp rigging rotted away, and scattered bones vanished beneath shifting currents. Yet every chart crossing those waters still follows routes once stained by unimaginable violence, reminding historians that behind every legendary pirate stood countless forgotten victims whose lives transformed entire oceans into vast floating graveyards.